Welcome to The One Inside, an internal family systems podcast. I'm your host, Tammy Sollenberger. On today's podcast, we talk about beyond hopelessness and despair with Jim Abrams. Hey everyone, I'm super excited to bring today's podcast with you. I chat again with my first guest ever, Jim Abrams. Jim is a frequent program assistant at IFS trainings, so he's well known by many. Jim emailed me, checking in, sharing lessons he's learning, and we wanted to share them with you. So before we get going, I wanted to tell you some super exciting news. Many of you know that I wrote a book. I mentioned it in the episode I did with Frank and the one I did with Dick. The title of the book is called The One Inside, 30 Days to Your Authentic Self. I have a book deal with an up-and-coming publishing house, and we're in the final stages of editing. It's a long process. I should have the cover to you, hopefully, in the next few weeks. That will be up on my website, tammysollenberger.com. Also, of course, I'll post it on Instagram, and I'm at IFS Tammy. So, back to the episode. One of my favorite quotes that Jim says, I think summarizes this episode, this sweet episode, so well, is we are not asking the part to be hopeful. We're asking the system, which is self, to bring comfort and connection to that part so its experience of the circumstance changes. Enjoy.
Yeah, so why don't you tell me about what has happened that has brought you to having some of these aha moments and this sort of pearls of wisdom that you want to share with us today?
Yeah, well, I don't know about pearls of wisdom. These are, I have found as a result of very difficult circumstances, something important for me that has enabled me to be helpful to other people who are experiencing hopeless parts. And I think it's an area of emphasis that these aren't new discoveries, but I think these are areas of emphasis that we could emphasize more in our teachings and our writings. So in 2016, I got prostate cancer, and I remember going to the Dana-Farber oncologist, who I was very lucky and still am lucky to have. And she says, I'm going for a cure. And I said, all right, I'm on board with that. The problem is that by the time the prostate was removed, it had already spread outside the prostate. And so once it's in the lymph, the chances of a cure are pretty slim. She's put me on some pretty heavy meds, and I had like 3+ years of remission. But then in 2019, the PSA, which is the biomarker for prostate, started to climb a little bit. And she said, yeah, we were hoping for a cure, but we knew it was a long shot. And the language she used was palliative care, which is just a really nice way of saying we're going to try to keep you alive and comfortable for as long as possible. But when I asked her about what does this mean, she said, look, you can talk, you might be talking 10 years. It's so, and it was microscopic, and I felt well. So I had parts, of course, that were discouraged and were worried and whatever, but frankly, the problem felt a little bit off in the distance and a little bit abstract.
Yeah.
And so then a little while later, I started to get some pain in my right leg, and they couldn't diagnose it. They thought it was they thought it was pinched nerve. They thought it might have been from a vein, blah, blah, blah. But eventually I said to one of the doctors, there's something toxic and it's progressive. Please get an image.
Wow. And
they found a metastasized tumor in the femur, and they immediately got me off my leg because they were afraid it would break. And they got a rod in there and radiation, and then I got onto a very heavy med that I'm on now, which takes away your testosterone, which it's a glandular cancer. For breast cancer, for women, they take away your estrogen. And anyway, which has its own effects. But the problem became more real.
Yeah.
And so I had parts that were grieving and parts that were hoping for that this wasn't real. And I thought I was doing it really well because I was functioning, I was positive, I was present, my wife kept saying what a great attitude I had. But I was doing a PA with a level 1. This was virtual, but this was like December. And it was obvious. We did that, you know how we did the staff meeting at lunch, and it was obvious that I was in pain. I was rubbing my leg like this, and Rena, who was the lead trainer at the time, said, "Jim, I'll bet you that pain has meaning." And it's like it opened it up. It's because what I didn't realize was that I had a self-like part that was keeping all those feelings suppressed. I thought I was doing IFS well, but I had a self-like part that was not letting me really engage. And once she said that, I was able to recognize that there really is a young part that is just scared and needy and wants to be held. And I was able to be with him.
Wow.
My son had, from his childhood, had a little stuffed animal on his bed, and I happened to be in that room where we were working, so that the noise from the level 1 wasn't bothering my wife. And so I laid down and I took that little stuffed animal and I held him for an hour, and we sort of cried. And he knows that I know him, and he knows that I care, and he knows that I'm there. And he softened.
So was that little boy, I wonder if you can sort of back up, if it feels okay to back up and talk about maybe how you got to him, like how you got the protectors that were saying, I don't know. I wonder if we could do that.
That's a great question, Tammy. I don't know that I know. The minute that Rena said, "I'll bet you that part has meaning," I was open to understanding more who that was holding that meaning. And I suddenly felt his fear, and I felt his loneliness, and I felt his terror, and I felt he doesn't want to go through this terrible reality all by himself. Yeah. And I let him know that no matter what happens, he doesn't have to.
Yeah. Yeah.
And he felt 4. I don't know, but they're more than one, but they something very neat happened, which is, as I spent more time with those parts that were feeling hopeless as in I cannot tell those parts that it's going to be okay. I cannot tell them the reality is different, that it's going to change. But this is the aha thing, which is it changed my experience of the circumstance, even though it didn't change the circumstance.
Okay. Yes. Okay. So that's one of our pearls of wisdom. So let's stop there for a second. And I just want to say, maybe just check in with you and see how you're feeling. And I just want to say, I feel so honored that you're being so vulnerable. And I wish I could reach out and just hold your hand for a second.
I feel that from you.
Is there anything you need, or how are you doing right now?
I'm fine.
Okay. So one of the things that you said in the email that really struck out to me is that, right, like we're so used to, you didn't say it this way, but we're so used to being able to say to those parts like, well, that's not happening now, and let's update you, and let's come and bring to the present. And what if the present is bad? Or what if we're holding, and I think you talked about, what if we're holding a divorce? What if we're holding an unhappy marriage? What if we're holding being married to someone who's an alcoholic or someone who's trying to get sober, because I know you work with a lot of people that are in that world. And so what if, or what if you're holding, I have this illness and I can't say it's all going to be fine.
That's right. That's right. Look, we IFS knows this. When we do a do-over with young parts that were wounded, we're not changing those circumstances. We're changing their experience of those circumstances. But most of the time, I think we think of ourselves as hope merchants, trying to bring positivity into a dark moment. And I think this is, for me at least, it's an aha, which is that we can bring enormous value, even with people who are in bleak and dire circumstances, where the hopelessness with respect to changing the outcome is valid and real.
Yeah, it's beautiful. That's beautiful.
What it's done for me is a second aha, which is those parts. I know those parts now. They know me. And it's not infrequently that I feel negative feelings. I feel, why can't things just be easier, especially when new pains emerge? But they don't blend with me anymore, so that I can feel them simultaneously. I can feel joy, that I'm thrilled to be with you, and I feel alive and well, and that I can contribute to the world. And I'm still me, and generally I feel pretty well. So it's very cool to be able to simultaneously hold pain and grief and fear and joy and gratitude and positivity, and it's real, which is kind of a little miracle. Let me just share one other thing, which is, I don't want to present to your audience that it just is this easy march. Because even as much as 4 weeks ago, 5 weeks ago, 6 weeks ago, whatever, I went into a pretty serious clinical depression. Even after all of what I just shared with you. That I didn't want to get out of bed, and I didn't want to see my people because it felt like I don't care. I don't have the energy. And that's so much not like me. Seeing my people is such a source of gratitude and benefit to me. And I couldn't unblend. And Paul Newstead, who you interviewed, and I are good friends, and we sometimes occasionally shared sessions, and he and I talked, and I was able to start to name what was going on for me, which was this, that the oncology, I was starting to feel more and more physical pain, and I asked her what's going on, and she says that's simply the effect of having this medicine this long, which is taking away your testosterone, which weakens your bones and muscles and joints. And it was nice for a moment to have a root cause, and then it was a clinical depression, because that suddenly this idea of having a terminal illness wasn't abstract. It was, I saw it right in the face. It was, I am not going to get better. I'm not going to get my testosterone back. I'm not going to get better. This is going to continue. This is real. And as I shared that, I started to unblend. And then I said to Paul, and this is really important, I want your audience to hear this. I said to Paul, how come I couldn't unblend? After all, I like to think of myself as reasonably expert as an IFS practitioner. And he said, Jim, sometimes we need someone else. Well, of course.
Yeah.
And since that moment, I have not been depressed. That part, it's a healthy, necessary, hard step to face your circumstances right in the eye. But those parts know that I know them, and that I love them, and that they're not alone. And they don't blend. I can feel them. I notice them. and they know that I notice them. So I feel like I'm in a really good place, and I wanted to contribute something else to the IFS way of thinking, which is that we can bring real value to people in really dire circumstances, and that it's possible, amazingly, to simultaneously hold pain and discouragement and fear and joy.
Yeah. What's coming up for me is those parts that are so afraid of feeling that they keep us out of all of it, so that we don't get right. So the depression is that shut down, right? This shut down, and so yeah. What do you say for the people that are struggling with that idea of like, I can't even look towards this because it's so overwhelming, or I'm so afraid of it, or yeah.
Love that part.
Okay.
Love that part. Of course you feel that way.
Right.
And as that part feels the strength and weight and power of that love, it'll start to respond and give you access to all the rest of your parts.
Which includes the joy and includes the withness, right? Like I love this word withness. And that's what you're saying is there was withness happening with inside your system, you being with your parts and your parts not feeling as alone. And then there was withness that had to happen externally with Paul.
That's right. And with respect to your first question about parts that don't want to go there, that was my first story, which was I was being managed by a self-like manager that was keeping it all suppressed. And I didn't know that. I thought I was doing it right. So
yeah. And then your body tell you something different, right? Like that's what a great trailhead, right? And then we don't realize you're like, I'm fine. That's me. I'm like, I'm fine. And then all of a sudden there's like some sort of body pain. I'm like, oh, I guess I'm not fine.
And it took, I think, the breakthrough from Rena's comment.
Yeah. And I think too, being in, right, like Rena there, and also being in that atmosphere, right? There's something about being in that atmosphere, being in a training, being a PA, that often so much of our own work happens Amen. There.
That's absolutely true. I'm so much better with and after those weekends.
Yeah. I'm going to read something that you wrote because I thought this was really beautiful. This is what you wrote. I think this may bring a slightly new outcome when we work with polarities. Beyond befriending the polarized parts, when we begin working with them, once the exile is unburdened, each side of the polarity can be a welcome part of our consciousness and coexist simultaneously. As Nightbird says, life is hard and life is joyful. We are most alive when we can hold both.
Yeah. Are you familiar with Nightbird?
No.
Nightbird is a woman that was on AGT, America's Got Talent, that has cancer in 3 different parts of her body. She's 30 years old, and she presented with enormous glow of joy. And she got a golden buzzer and actually had to withdraw from the finals because of her illness. But one of the things she said is you don't have to wait for life to be, you can't wait for life to not be hard anymore before you decide to be happy. And she showed up with such joy. And she was saying what I've been trying to say for months, but said it better because she had more drama and she had this glow. And so I actually wrote a testimony to my audience saying it's not a decision. It's not, you don't decide to be happy. There's a process. And the process is you have to not deny the pain and the grief and the terribleness. You have to honor it and allow it.
Right. And work with the parts. I'm going to go back to that and work with the parts that are so afraid of being flooded by it.
Exactly. And I trust them too, and honor them.
Right.
Of course they feel that way. And then bring, in her case, she's Christian, so bringing God's love into that space. And from my point of view, bringing some source of divine compassion that we hold inside of us into those spaces. And then it's possible to hold both. And Yeah, when we talk about polarities, I think we don't emphasize the possibility that both of those parts, after we befriend them, we then go into the exile, and then, in theory, then those polarities just relax and they're not fighting each other anymore.
Yeah.
They can become friends.
Yeah.
They can both be honored. Of course, it's necessary to be able to assert yourself, and of course, it's necessary to be able to pick your battles. And hearing both enables bookends, enables wisdom. So I just think it's something we could emphasize a little bit more when we're teaching polarities. That's all.
Yeah, no, I love it. I love it. And I love that. And I think what happens is we forget, as you're talking, what's coming up for me is, and we forget that self is there, right? That it's like, I'm run by this one or I'm run by this one. And it's like, no, like self is here. And when self shows up in the room, then we can befriend those polarities, those polarized parts, and we can help them relax, and we can bring compassion to them, and we can hear their story, and then we can find out who they're protecting. And then we go to who they're protecting, and we witness, we are with that exile, that young part, with that part, unburden that part. And then those polarized parts can have different jobs and different roles, and our whole system, our whole life can change.
That's right. That's right.
I mean, I think that's the crazy promise of IFS, right? It's not a crazy promise because it's true. Like our whole life can change. And that's what you're saying, Jim, is that like, this could have been a completely different experience for you.
Right. Isn't it traditional that, at some point those hopeless parts end up just bringing despair?
Yeah.
When I was younger, I had the sort of normal levels of hypochondriasis. And so if I thought about the day when I might be diagnosed with terminal illness, I assumed I would panic all the time, which would not be strange. But I'm fully alive and able to be with those parts, thank God, and thank self-energy. I just want to say there's one other implication for this, which is it's brought me a new awareness of the need to focus on parts that hold hopelessness, even with people that are not dealing with terminal illnesses. I've got one guy who's so unhappy with how his life turned out. He's in his mid-50s. He's had no success in building romantic relationships. He's been rejected all over the place. He was bullied as a kid. His parents were psychotic in various ways. So he has a worldview of a victim, and every boss has mistreated him and so forth. And for such a long time, I tried to work with all those parts and so forth. And then I realized that he has a part that doesn't believe that it's possible to be hopeful, that it's dangerous to be hopeful.
Yeah.
He's starting to really be able to recognize that he has within him a source of comfort for that, regardless of whether circumstances change.
Wow.
What's cool is that I can see changes in his level of optimism and confidence, and his physical posture is less victimized, which is much more likely to make him attractive.
Right.
Right. There's another guy I work with who actually is a good friend. So I referred him to one of the lead trainers I know, and his wife, for good reason, finds it very difficult to trust him because of his addiction and secrecy for years. And it was more than once. So those parts are totally valid, but he's been totally sober and doing all the right things for over a year, and nothing's changed in her relationship with him. Whenever she sees him making some sort of strange reaction, she thinks what's going on and starts to accuse him of all sorts of stuff. And of course that generates parts.
Yeah.
And so the lead trainer and I, he and I talk once a week, not as his therapist, but as his friend or kind of coach. Most of us were sort of focused on how to try to be helpful to his wife. And then I realized, and that was also where the lead trainer was, we really needed to focus on the part of him that was getting so discouraged because nothing was changing and it was losing hope.
Yeah.
And it's made an enormous difference in his ability to not be triggered by her. So there's big implications for, I know IFS already knows this, but I don't know that we're as intentionally thinking about it.
Yeah, like it's as explicit, like we're being as explicit about it.
Right. And think of all your clients and how many of them are holding hopeless parts that may need some help.
Yeah.
So that the other parts can be helped.
Yeah. Yeah. Have you heard with Mike Elkin how he talks about parts use hopelessness as a resource?
Yeah.
And I think that's kind of what you're saying about this. What could happen is that like it's too scary. Like I have a client that I'm thinking about right now that I've talked to her about the hopelessness and despair and it as a resource, and that idea, right? If you've been, sort of the same thing as your guy, right? Horrible childhood, adulthood, now mid 50s, and life is not what she thought it was going to be. And I can't say it's all going to be better. Like, no, you are not going to get the things that you wanted in your life, right? Like I can't say that, right? And so the hopelessness, I feel like, ends up being a part that says that's almost a safe place for me to stay.
It's scary to be hopeful, but we're not asking that part to be hopeful. We're asking the system to bring comfort and connection to that part so that its experience of the circumstances changes.
Great. That's really great.
Yeah, we're not asking it to be hopeful. That's I don't know about you, but I'd never want to fight with a part.
No. Oh yes. And I have a part that I feel like does that. I can notice myself doing that, arguing with my clients' parts. And I'm like, wait, what are you doing?
Yeah.
Jim, that makes me feel better that you do it too. That is great. We're not asking the part to be hopeful. What we're doing is we're bringing self to that part. And then that, by bringing self to the part and being with the part, it changes the part's experience.
That's right. If the part knows that within you there is a source of comfort, that's different. When we emphasize, we really need to invite and honor the parts that are carrying the most pain or grief or hopelessness, because they need to know that we know them. We need to know that we hear them, that we love them, we're not afraid of them, that we can hold them. And then they don't have to blend. And that's the big difference.
Yes.
When blend, right. I can't feel joy.
Right.
But if they know that I know them and I can feel when they're feeling what they're feeling, and I can honor that and be with them, they don't have to blend, and then I can hold joy and their feelings. So that's the emphasis. It's just that's a step that is absolutely necessary from my point of view. You've got to be with the grief as it is, and it's not easy to get to that.
Yeah, and it's not easy, but it also says you've given us some ways to do that, of whether it's being with friends and trusted colleagues and trusted friends, or your therapist or whoever that is, and really letting your system feel yourself, feel your true self. And
I don't know what practice you have. I tend to have about 20-30 minutes of quiet time in the morning. Just sit in the dark, and not too dark, but sit and slowly sip coffee. And I don't even think of it as like IFS, but it's a check-in.
Love it. Yeah. So it's another really good, like having a daily practice, whatever that is, like a daily practice of either checking in with your parts or some sort of meditation, or like I do centering prayer. Like that's just quiet. And my centering prayer ends up being some sort of weird centering prayer, checking in with my parts time. Because my parts are like, oh, you're not moving.
I'd love to see what that's like. So someone should move with you.
So Jim, how can people get in contact with you? Like, how can people just maybe send you a note or just ask you any questions? Or
so my email is jim.abrams, jim.abrams 456 at gmail.com. You look awesome, great. And just like, so I'm so happy to spend this time with you. And thank you. You do this really, really well. I felt totally comfortable.
Thanks, Jim. Thanks. You were a part of this whole thing, right? I mean, there was a whole thing that happened about the podcast and I wasn't sure if I was going to do it or not. And so you were a huge part of encouraging me. And, and I said at the very beginning, I need guests and listeners. And if I didn't have any guests, so thank you so much for being my first guest and being there for me during that time. It was my first PA gig and a lot was happening in my life. And so.
Are you still PAing?
Yeah, I actually have a level 1 PA gig that I'm starting next week, and then I'm PAing for level 2 addictions with Mary. Yeah, in
she's
October.
Another one that she and I have become really close friends. When I was doing her level 2 most recently in Portugal, she had no AT, but her sound was her internet was fuzzy and coming in and out. So she said, Jim, would you please fill in if I'm not available? So I felt very honored.
Jim, good. Yeah. Because you've been doing this for so long. I feel like you could easily be an AT if that's like, you could fill in that for that. And even during the training we did, which was a couple of years ago, you definitely have a leadership role. Like it was clear.
Yeah, it's all good. I'm with my health now. I'm not trying to do anything other than contribute.
Yeah, it's great. Jim, thank you so much. This was wonderful.
You
wonderful
are a
to
blessing.
see you.
You well.
Thanks for hanging out today. If you like this episode, make sure you subscribe. And if you really like this episode, share it with a friend and leave a review. You can follow me on Instagram at IFS Tammy and join our community on Facebook at the One Inside Podcast. Talk to you next time.